I'm Pastor Tom, and welcome to the Sunday Sermon. 'Cause when the Lord gets ready, you got to move. Oh, you got to move. Okay, please remain standing. I'm going to read to you now from the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 46 through 54. Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, the place where he had turned water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son was sick in Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was requesting of him to come down and heal his son, who was at the point of death. Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you simply won't believe." And the royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." And Jesus said, "Go your way, your son lives." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he started off. And as he was now going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was living. So he asked them, at what time his son began to get better? And they said, "Well, yesterday, at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the fever left him." And the father recognized that that was the exact hour in which Jesus had said to him, "Your son lives." And so he believed, and his household. And this is the second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. You may be seated. Have you had those times in your life where you're kind of at your wit's end? You know, when it's just like everything keeps going wrong, and no matter how hard you try, it just keeps happening. You're just like you're banging into that wall over and over again, and you're thinking, how long is this going to keep going? It's got to stop. It's got to stop. And it doesn't stop. It just keeps coming. It's like one thing after another, and it's like, oh, and then you see what you're supposed to do, and you do it, and it still doesn't work out, and you're just struggling, and you're getting increasingly desperate for solutions to the problems. You understand this, right? Solutions, you're just like, Life does this to us. I don't care who you are, eventually that will happen to you at some point. And when you get there, what do? What happens? At what point do we suddenly find ourselves on our knees, weeping, begging God for help, or maybe yelling at God, like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you letting this stuff happen?" Both of which are considered prayer, by the way. I don't want you to, we have this bad habit of going, well, no matter how I feel, I have to pray, and I have to be gracious and careful with God because God's feelings might be hurt. So I have to say all these wonderful, like, "Oh, glorious and wonderful Lord. Oh, spectacular creator of the universe. I beseech thee," like God's going to have, like, "Oh my, you were angry at me. I can't take that." No, God doesn't care. Yelling at God is a form of prayer. Feel free, okay? My prayer life has included, conversations, tears, objects flying across the room, right? Because God wants us to be there, all of it, like just lay it out. So we come to the end of our rope, though. What do we do when things get desperate? I think about this all the time because, I'm not a prepper. I don't know if any of you guys are preppers. People are like, the end of the world is coming. We got to get ready. I could probably feed myself for the rest of the week, So not real good at long-term planning. But I'm aware of the fact that, if the system that we live in, if culture breaks down, that there are medicines that, like my wife depends on or my father-in-law depends on, if those no longer are available, what does that mean? And what are the links to which I'd be willing to go to secure those things? And And if you've ever been in hospital settings and been with parents whose children are at the point where they're dying, you see that desperation. You know it. I mean, you can't, it's right there. Who's going to be the next person we're going to go to? Who's the second opinion? Is there a clinical trial we can try? Is there something, just something we can do? It doesn't matter how much it costs. We're just anything, right? So you can understand this father. And he's actually a man of resource. He's described as a royal official. And so, because of where he is, he would be in the court of Herod. By the way, there were like 4 Herods. So Herod the Great, King Herod, the one who was the king when Jesus was born, after he died, the kingdom he ruled over, ruled is a kind of a sketchy word here, because his authority to govern that was given to him by the Romans, but it kind of looked like there was a Jewish kingdom, and so everyone was kind of happy with that. But then it got divided up among his 4 sons, all of whom were named Herod. So I'm not sure which Herod this one is up in Galilee. I think it's Antipas, but who knows? They were all named Herod, so you're pretty good if you just say King Herod. You got the right. There's a Herod in there somewhere. So, but this is the Herod who's governing over Galilee, and they did not. The term king was used for them as kind of, I think, politeness, but the other term that was used was tetrarch, which indicated that there were 4 of them and that they had authority over these 4 regions. But nobody wanted to say that because they always wanted to recognize we got a king. You know, we're our own country, even though we're under Roman law. So he works in the kingdom. He's politically powerful. He's a royal official. He's not just some average dude. He's not some poor person who's going, I have got no resources. He's got resources. He's wealthy enough that he's got a household, that it's got servants, that he's got people working for him, and slaves he owns. Always wrong, by the way, even when it was normal. So he comes looking for Jesus. How he got word about Jesus, we don't know. It's not like the internet, you know. Like, hey, did you hear the news? But the word must have spread. Because Capernaum was actually Jesus's, as an adult, his hometown. So it's Jesus from Nazareth, right? So he's born in Bethlehem, spends a couple years in Egypt, according to one of the Gospels, grows up in Nazareth, and then later is apparently living in Capernaum. Like, I guess he got a house in Capernaum, because they would talk about that in some of the Gospels. They talk about him going home to Capernaum. So Capernaum is where this guy lives, this royal official. So maybe he'd heard about Jesus there. Word had reached him about a miracle Jesus did, turning water into wine at a wedding. Do you remember that story, right? If you haven't heard it, let me tell it to you. It's really kind of funny. Jesus gets invited to a wedding, and his mom gets invited too. So Jesus shows up, and his mom, and his disciples, his entourage, if you will, they crash at the wedding party. And they drink too much, and they run out of wine. And Jesus' mom comes up to him and says, they've run out of wine. And Jesus says, my hour has not yet come. Is this really my responsibility? And she answers, and then says to the waiters who are serving the meal, she says, do whatever he tells you, and walks away. So that's a good mom. She knows he goes, okay. So he tells the waiters, they've got like these huge pots full of water. There's about 70 gallons of water. He says, all right, fill them to the brim with water. Now bring it here. Scoop some of the water out. Bring it to the guy who's running the feast. So there was a guy whose job was kind of to run the whole show. Bring it to him. And it had turned into wine, and it was really good. Yeah, I mean, it was like the best stuff. And the guy's startled by this, because what everyone would have expected was Jesus would have run out to the local liquor store and come back with a couple of boxes of wine, right? Not that there would suddenly be some of the best wine anyone had ever had anywhere. And he says to the groom who is footing the bill for this, he says, everyone serves the good wine first, and then when all the folks are drunk, then they bring out the cheap stuff, but you've saved the best wine till last. So this is the miracle that Jesus does. Clearly, word got back to Capernaum. It's an interesting leap to go from turning water into wine to, this guy might be able to heal my son. But it is possible, because the Gospels don't necessarily give us every single thing that happened, that other stories about Jesus and his healings had kind of gotten out there. By the way, you heard Jesus say, oh man, you just won't believe unless you see signs and wonders. It's easy to accuse Jesus of being just another, there's actually a word for this, the word is thaumaturge. A thaumaturge is like a person who goes around and does wonder-working and miracles and stuff like that. Think street magician, hawker of snake oil, whatever. So they had these back then. People would go around and they'd run their little healing shows and stuff like that. And so it was easy to accuse Jesus of being one of these people. And the other word for them, by the way, in some of the cultures, the other word for them would be magi. That was an old word that got used in different ways in different places, but that word magi could, or magus, could mean thaumaturge, somebody who's walking around doing miracles and claiming to have power. And so it was easy for people to just assume Jesus was one of those. He seems to have this sort of like, oh, not this again. Why don't you just listen to what I'm saying instead of like looking for some kind of miracle? But this poor guy is in desperation. He has come from Capernaum to Cana. That's 20 miles. Now, you and me, 20 miles, no big deal. That's, 25 minutes in the car. That's a day and a half otherwise. It's a day and a half. That's how long it'll take you to get there. So this guy, he's so desperate. He is so desperate because his child is sick and dying. He's so desperate that he leaves his son for a day, and he won't get back for 3 days. He knows he doesn't know if his son's still going to be there. But it's the only thing he could think to do. He's exhausted everything else. Otherwise, he wouldn't be trying. Day and a half he's got to travel to find Jesus. I don't know. He's a royal official. Did he think maybe he could force Jesus to come? We don't know if he came alone, or I assume he had some people with him. That would make sense if he had some folks with him. Like maybe he brought some bodyguards who could then, encourage Jesus to come along, at the point of a knife or something. Like, you are coming with us to heal my kid. I don't know what his thinking was. I'm sure that in the course of a day and a half, he went through lots of different scenarios in his mind of how he was going to get Jesus there. But when he actually encounters Jesus, all he can do is beg. Please, help my son. Won't you please come and help my son? He's about to die. Don't you see how desperate I am? Don't you see how much it hurts? Don't you see how hard this is? Don't you see how much I'm struggling? And then Jesus says to him, he says, okay, go. Your son's going to live. Would that be enough for you? Right? Think about this. Your last shot of healing is for this guy to come with you so he can heal your kid. That's the last, you've tried everything else. And he says, it's going to be okay. Is that enough? How do you make that journey back with nothing but his word to go on? That is tricky business. That's hard. In that moment when Jesus says that to him, he's like, okay, I'm trusting you. But what did he think? Did he think, but if my son dies, I'm coming back and I'm hunting you down? I don't know what he thought. I just know that in that moment, He decided to take Jesus at his word, and he starts heading back. But can you imagine how terrifying that would be? How hopeful. I mean, I keep thinking about a kid. I have this picture in my mind, like, kid gets up in the morning, and in my head, there's always like two versions of this same story. So in one version of the story, kid gets up in the morning and comes downstairs, and mom and dad are like, "Happy birthday, honey. When you get home, there'll be, birthday cake and stuff like that." And the kid spends all day like this. "When I get home, there's birthday cake. I can't wait to find my birthday cake." Right? Full of hope and joy and happy, and that journey is like skipping through the day. It's the best day he's ever had at school, because when he gets home, there's cake. And then the other version of the story gets up, mom and dad are still passed out from the binge drinking and drugs that they did the night before. Kid goes and pours himself some Cheerios and eats that for breakfast. There's no milk, so just eats them dry. But as he's going out the door, right, Dad's like, "Oh, honey, happy birthday, little guy, little man. When you get home, there'll be some cake." Except here's the thing. His parents aren't very good at keeping those promises. So he goes through that day, on the one hand, filled with hope. Will there be cake? I hope there'll be cake. Maybe it'll be different this time. And on the other hand, all of this experience where it wasn't any different. Totally different day. I imagine this guy traveling back to Capernaum is more like that second kid, not like the first kid. Because anyone who's lived life knows that life sometimes dishes up pain and hurt. And you can't live in that day and age. When you read historically, the average life expectancy, someone was like, "Oh, it's 30 or 40 years old." But that wasn't because people didn't live to be 60 or 70. It's because there was such a high rate of infant mortality and childhood death from diseases that we've mostly eradicated now. It was a big deal if you survived at all. There was a big party. If you got weaned, there was a big party to celebrate that. That's how we actually see. There's a description of that big party in the book of Genesis, because Isaac survives long enough to get weaned, and he ends up living a good long life. But that means that you have seen death. If you live in that culture, you've seen death, and a lot of childhood death. And so there's a lot of reason to not trust this. And yet, regardless of how he feels, regardless of what his brain is telling him, regardless of what that spinning gerbil on the spinning wheel is yelling, "It's not real, it's not real," and the fears that are gnawing at the back of his head, he still takes Jesus at his word, and he goes back. And he is a day into his day-and-a-half journey when people from his house, his servants, have come out, and they've come looking for him. They've come to get him with the news that at the exact time that Jesus said, "Your son lives," the fever broke. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that it says again, the word belief shows up a couple times there. So the first time Jesus says, "Your son lives," and says, "And he believed," and he went back. Right? The second time, now he's got the proof, right? And now he says, "And he believed, and his whole household." There's a different kind of faith, right? There's the faith, the belief, so to speak, that I've seen it. I know. And there's another kind of faith that says, I trust, but I haven't seen it yet. And it turns out that most of life is the journey between Cana and Capernaum. Most of our experience of life is us being told, here's the promise of God, but the fulfillment is over there. And we're on the journey. And it is not that often when somebody comes from over there to tell us. I think about this because, what is the major number one promise that lies at the heart of our faith? It's this, that this life is not all there is of life. that there's more, and that what awaits us is love if we'll have it. That's the central promise of our faith. And so every time I do a funeral, that's what I proclaim. That's what I tell people. It is not too often that folks come back from over there, like the servants running to say, hey, your kid is well. There are those people who've had those experiences, and they come back, and what do they tell us? It was peaceful, it was loving, it was beautiful. I felt I felt the love. Over and over again, that's the descriptor that comes back. That's what we have to go on, folks. We're walking on the path from Cana to Capernaum. We're waiting to see if that promise is going to be fulfilled, and we're trusting it will be. We're not at that place that he gets to be the father in the story when he sees how the promise is fulfilled, and that belief has a different quality to it. As Paul said, faith becomes sight. It's in this other place. And this is really the question that I guess we have to ask ourselves. Is that enough for us? Is it enough for us to trust that it is love that drives us, love that calls us, and love that guides us? Is it enough to trust that? And especially, you turn on the news, you're like, that does not seem like love is going on here. The world does not seem like such a loving place. Can we trust that it's really about that? That the grace of God is really there for us, at work for us? Can we believe that the one who says, go in peace, it'll be fine, is the one who walks with us on that journey, is the one who greets us when we get there? Can we really trust that? Is that enough? For some people, it isn't. And sometimes for any of us, it isn't. But I think most of the time, for me at least, it is. Can you find the prayer of response? Please stand. We're going to pray that prayer together. So often, I come to you in desperation at the end of my rope, having exhausted my resources. You become my last hope. Odd that, when you should be my first hope. I arrive expecting, praying, demanding you to come to fix and heal, but you send me on my way with nothing but a promise that all is well. How am I to return empty-handed? How am I to dare the journey with nothing but your word? So much of life is lived precisely there. So much of life is that path between the promise given and the promise realized. And the important question becomes, are faith, hope, and love sufficient for me? Make them sufficient in me, Lord Jesus. Amen. We'd love to have you join us for Sunday worship at 8:30 at the Christ United Methodist Church, or 10:15 at the Stanton United Methodist Church. Until next time, may the Lord God bless you and keep you. May the face of the Almighty be upon you, and may God grant you peace. When the Lord gets ready, you got to move. Oh, you got to